This interview is part of the SSCA Circumnavigators Summit, sharing experiences of members who circumnavigated. All engaged in this project are volunteers providing information solely for entertainment and education purposes. SSCA may edit and publish the interviews in the SSCA Circumnavigation Summit in audio and video formats to benefit its membership and as a recruiting tool. SSCA and participants assume no responsibility for the accuracy or validity of information shared in these interviews. Opinions stated do not necessarily reflect those of the Seven Sea Cruising Association.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the SSCA Circumnavigators Summit. My name is Jackie Lee from Trimaran Sloopmoose, and I have the privilege to interview some of these special members who have completed a circumnavigation. Many volunteers at SSCA are working hard to make the organization new and fresh and relevant to our members. So we hope you will enjoy this new series. Many sailors wonder what it takes to make a circumnavigation and whether they could do it. We will be interviewing SSCA members who did it. Believe it or not, over 100 members sailed around the world just in between the period between 2001 and 2019. And bravo to them. You will have a chance to hear many varied types of sailors. Solo sailors, families, 2 to 3 year voyages, 20 plus years, international members, former SSCA board members, motor vessel owners, celebrities, and regular sailors just like us. So, without further ado, let's get right to the interview. I'm very excited today to do this interview with two international members, Almuth Otterstedt from Germany and Eduard Keck from Switzerland, on the sailing boat Single Malt. So welcome, Edi and Almuth.
Thank you very much for welcoming us. I'm with you.
Well, thanks very much for inviting us to this interview, and we will see how this is going on.
We are very happy to have you consent to do this interview, because not only is it nice to talk to some European members, but you also have some very fascinating and interesting stories to tell us, and we'll find out those things during the interview. Can you tell us briefly each of your backgrounds and how you got into sailing?
I was born in Czechoslovakia, 1943, and as my parents were German, and as the Russians invaded, my mother fled 1945, just some days before the Russians came, and it took her 2 years and was living with us children, my brother and me, as a refugee in her own country until we reached Bremen, the northern town of Germany, where my father came from. There I grew up, went to school, worked all my working life, and was married for about 20 years, had no children, and happily divorced. And my hobbies were painting, mainly with watercolor, also some drawing, dancing. I was doing belly dancing, and I became hem operator. And I also loved to learn languages until I met Edi. That was in 1998.
Well, as to me, that's Edi. I was born 1936 in Bern, and that's where I went to school. And I left school early to go over to England. That was in 1952, to join the School of Navigation of the University of Southampton. At that time, that's shortly after the war, things were still rationed over there, and life was very, very different to what it is like today. I sailed as an apprentice officer with a British company, and became an officer in the British Merchant Navy when there still was such a thing. That is also the time, 52, 53, when I got into sailing for obvious reasons. We did that at the school, and I had my first holiday afloat in spring 53, instead of going home for a leave, which would have meant 2 days traveling back and forth by railway, no flights those days. I prefer to use these days on a small boat, and that's how I had my first vacation afloat. Then I did my training as a captain. They thought I should become a captain, and during that time I was asked if I would be interested in becoming a career officer, and after some thinking I became a career officer. I retired 91, had my wife then, but just at the beginning of that year 91 she became very ill. We had to give up all our plans, and I lost her 95.
Yes, I'm sorry that you lost your wife, but you did meet Almuth afterwards. Almuth, so then you learned your sailing from Edi?
Yes, that is right. We met accidentally in Switzerland, and only some days later Edi flew back to Kuşadası in Turkey, where his boat, where the single Malt was lying. And a short while later I joined him and had no idea of sailing. So I had to learn step by step. I just did learning by doing.
That's the best way. That's the best way. And when you both got on single Malt, now, Edi, that you had a partner, did you plan then or think about starting a circumnavigation?
Well, that is a little bit more complicated. It goes back much further. I told you 52, over in England. At that time, nobody was thinking of doing a circumnavigation. One had other things to think about. Later, when I was in Switzerland, I had a friend, and with that friend, we used to sit together from time to time, and we were thinking, not planning, thinking about doing a thing like that. We even had a name for the boat. She was to be called Magellan. And in October 58, we had again a party together, he and his wife, and I with Doris, my future wife. And during a discussion, he took out a document which he had prepared. It was called Westward Bound. That was the general idea, and we all 4 signed it. Now, both wives have died in the meantime. Eric had, that's his name, he had sailed across the Atlantic with his first boat, sold her there, then he bought another one, sailed again over there, and after that, after selling the boat, he stopped sailing altogether. So it goes back then. But later on, I was only thinking of long-distance cruising, and not really of a circumnavigation. And when Almuth joined me, we actually were thinking of going to Alaska, and we had no idea how this should continue.
Sometimes things just happen, and suddenly somewhere, and that's the nice thing about the sailing life, you make plans and then you don't do them, or you don't make plans and you just find your way into something. What year did you consider that you started your circumnavigation, and from where?
So for me, we started in 1998 in May in Kuşadası in Turkey. and I had to learn every step, every grip, everything, and all what I was told to do. I wanted to do it better, and the better was always wrong. Poor Edi.
I like that. You have any remarks about that, Edi?
No comment.
Okay. So then, I'm sure that by the time the navigation was over, you were tip-top, probably climbing up the mast and back. How many years did it take you to do the circumnavigation?
From Kusadasi in Turkey, it took us 14 and a half years to return back to Kusadasi in Turkey.
It's nice to hear people that take their time and enjoy their way around the world. So what was the general route that you took?
Well, when we started in Kusadasi in May, it was a matter of getting Almuth a little bit up to date, so I wanted to do short trips at the beginning.
So I was introduced how to put away fenders and lines, and I did it really good, I think so. And when I came into the cockpit, Edi asked me to steer, and he gave me the course on the compass, and so I did very enthusiastically. And after a while, Edi told me, "I haven't said you should write your signature on the ocean." Well, we continued through the Med, and in Gibraltar, I asked Almuth if we should continue. There were several options: going back into the Med, going to the north, or continue. And then I said, what do you think? I want to sail around the world. Still no idea of sailing and how to live on the boat. That was just an idea. Well, we continued to Porto Santa Madeira. Until then, Edi was very reserved, very serious, no joke, no smile. And now he knew that I would stay on the boat. He got loosener, and now and then he made a joke, and he became even friendly. Okay, now we make it a little bit faster. We went to the Canaries, continued to the Canaries, down to the Cape Verdes, and then over the Atlantic. That was 99. So we had Christmas, New Year at sea under very adverse conditions. I do not want to talk about that. Then we arrived in Antigua, followed down all these islands to Trinidad, from there to Venezuela. That's where we spent the first cyclone season. Then we continued to Colombia, of course, via certain islands, and San Blas to Panama, and passed the Panama Canal early 2000s, just after the Chinese had taken over the management. Las Perlas, Galapagos, Marquesas, which was, of course, the first really long trip. And on the way from the Galapagos to Marquesas, we headed southwest for a while, picked up westerly direction, and then we started to go back to the direction equator again. And when we came closer to the equator, we had awkward situations, very variable winds, and with certain damage, certainly not enough fuel to motor from there, and then the doldrums in the northern part of the equator, as we wanted to head for Hawaii, Alaska finally. And we were drifting back direction Galapagos, so the decision was taken, let's go to the Marquesas. So we just went down to the Marquesas,
continue to the Tuamotus, Society Islands, to Palmerston, Niue, Tonga, and then to New Zealand. And in New Zealand it was directly down to Tauranga because we wanted to meet somebody there. We didn't want to stop in Opwa, nor in Whangarei, nor in Auckland, as most people that we took the long distance down to Tauranga. Then from 2001 to 2006, we stayed in New Zealand during the cyclone seasons, and perhaps we find time to talk about what we were doing during that time. During those years, 2001, 2006, and during the winter period, we used to be in the islands, that is Fiji Islands, perhaps the eastern part, including Lagrube, Fiji, the Western Islands, or New Caledonia, or the Friendship Islands, and Vanuatu, etc. Then the next 2 years, that is 2007 and 2008, we did the same thing from Australia. 2009, we left Australia for Indonesia, where we spent 3 months, not only Komodo Island, but Selayar, Sulawesi, Banjarmasin, that's an interesting place. Then continued on to Singapore, Malaysia, to Thailand. Thailand we left 2010, continued to the Andaman Islands, Adu Atoll, Chagos, Madagascar, Mayotte, back to Madagascar once more, and then to South Africa. 2011 we rounded South Africa, went to Namibia, St. Helena, and from St. Helena the long haul to the Azores, and then to Portugal. The following year, that is 2012, we followed the coast, went up the Guadiana River, crisscrossed the Med, and when I talk about crisscross the Med, that is from North Africa up to Menorca to visit a friend, down to Tunisia, up again, and finally to the northern part of the Aegean, and back to Kushadasi, where we arrived in mid-October 2012.
Single Malt is what kind of boat, and why did you take that particular boat?
Well, I had decided to retire early, that is 91, and we wanted to do long-distance cruising, but I have not had time to think about plans and then we were looking, of course, for a boat which was manageable by a short crew, that is of 2 people only, a very safe boat, a cockpit which is well protected, so that one doesn't suffer from fatigue too quickly, and other features like that. And we had several options, but finally we decided on our Sharkey by Amel, 39 feet, which was not a cheap boat at the time, but it proved to be a very effective cruiser.
I've seen other people on Amels, and there are some very well thought out ideas on some of the Amels, and certainly you see that they are more built for long cruising, or actually people living on them in mind, with some of the deep sinks and that sort of thing, than some of those other boats that are designed to stay in the marinas. So I'm glad that you are very satisfied with your Single Malt.
And don't forget, she is 39 feet. Amel doesn't build any boats like that since many, many years.
Just out of curiosity, why did you name it that? Do you like whiskey?
Oh, that's a story which takes about half an hour. Short way.
The short way, okay.
I sailed a few times on the sail training vessels Malcolm Miller and Sir Winston Churchill, 3-masted schooners, and topsail schooners and as a navigator. And once at the beginning, I had an old man who was from Scotland, and because of a certain incident which happened, he said, "I'm going to introduce you to the Malt." So I got introduced to the malts. That's many years ago when I started to collect malts. And when we got, well, not even when we got the boat, when the boat was under construction, my wife got a telephone call from Amel, and they wanted to know the name of the boat. And when I came back, I said, well, why not Halcyon 3? And she said, well, I've had enough of Halcyon. And then I said, I don't have time to think about it right now. I will find a solution, she said. When I came back next day, she said, what about single malt? And then I said, that's it. It's easy on the radio, and it's a little bit funny. And she made the phone call, and that's why the boat is called Single Malt.
Now, let's go on to a different subject. You've been SSCA members for a long while now. Do you remember how you heard about SSCA and why you decided to join?
Well, after I was on my own, I lived during the winter period on my boat in Turkey, Antalya, and later on also in Kushadazi. And at that time, American but also Canadian boats used to come up the Red Sea and winter in Turkey to be able to spend the following summer in Europe, that is the Med and Europe. And during that time, of course, one met, one had barbecues together, we did excursions, and I met a number of American people. One of the boats was called Why Not? Probably it was them who introduced me to SSCA, and I said, okay, let's join.
Another subject, how did you manage to sail in good weather conditions and avoid most bad weather? Was it possible to avoid bad weather, and what's the worst weather story you lived through?
Well, we can give an advice to not enter too early the cyclone areas and do not leave them too late. So leave them in a good time and avoid the autumn, winter and spring storms in the west wind areas.
Are bound to encounter bad weather from time to time, and then you just have to take it as it comes. But one tries to avoid. And as Almuth has said correctly, it is a matter of leaving the cyclone areas early enough, but not too early, because it's a compromise. If you leave too early, you get into the spring storms in the west wind drift area. Not only when you go to the west, down to the west drift area, it can also happen when you change from the northern Indian Ocean to the southern Indian Ocean. You want to leave early enough, but then you have to wait. But there are possibilities, of course, of waiting. Ado Atoll, Chagos, etc. That's how it is. Weather forecasts these days are, of course, much better than they used to be before, but I would say it's always very important to do an own judgment. Now you were asking about the very bad situation. Well, we could call many, but I'm thinking of our first trip down to Tauranga from Tonga. At the beginning, everything was right, okay, and then we started to get southerly winds, which picked up so that we had not a bad sea at all. And we talked to Russell Radio, which was a radio station in the northern part of the North Island, and near Opua, and we asked him to do what the wind is going to do. He says, well, it looks like it is now staying on southwesterly direction, but it will change to south, perhaps southeast. So we decided with the southwesterly, we head for southeast and wait for the southeasterly. But the wind did not change, remained there, and when it changed, it went to south, and we were east now of our track, and we had to go back. It was not very pleasant, and I said to Almuth at that time, well, if that wind is going to continue like that, we won't end up in New Zealand, we will end up somewhere in South America. Okay, that was over, and then the channel sheet snapped.
Oh, God.
Well, I said, that's not under these conditions, but I said to Almuth, it's not such a big problem. We can temporarily use our weather sheet, rig that, put it back to the cockpit. I had to take the old sheet away, of course, and that's when we noticed that it wasn't only dangling into the water, but that it was tight. We have a prop shaft generator, so our prop turned, and that sheet was wrapped around the prop. So we had to turn back the flywheel while Almuth pulled on the sheet, and finally were able to get that thing loose. And then happily I was back in the cockpit and thrown against the winch and snapped, let's call it snapped, a couple of ribs, which is of course not highly pleasant when you still have bad weather and the long distance to continue. But it was okay. We forget all these situations. When they arrive, you have to take them and deal with them.
Only good thing about those situations is that they get over with, and the other thing is that the human body and the mind seem to be so resilient that after they're over, you remember in your mind it was horrible, but somehow you don't still feel the actual pain and that sort of thing, and it becomes what, when I go through bad things, I'm always thinking to myself, this is going to make a good story when it's over. This is going to make a good story. And so you try to get through it like that. Think about what you can do, how you can do it.
That is the reason why down there in New Zealand, one so often boats for sale or people who got separated or divorced.
Let's talk about communications. What kind of communications did you use to keep in touch? Was there an evolution through your circumnavigation to different forms of communications? And what kind of recommendations do you might have for us?
Well, that's all very different these days. When we started together, I don't even talk further back, we relied on snail mail, but once at sea we had our radio, SSB, and in those days one had coastal stations and you were able to make phone calls over SSB via coastal station to your family or friends. You could also send telegrams. Things like that don't exist anymore, and most people haven't even heard of them anymore. We continued to write normal letters. And, of course, communication has also to do the other way around. At home, mail was getting stuck and not being forwarded, and with bills in them and so. And my brother-in-law, he used to separate that and send us the mail to a forwarding address, if that was possible, or sometimes with blacked out parts, he sent us an important message just by fax. But those forwarding mails did not function all the time. Sometimes they got lost, or once we even had a friend who came to visit us. In their luggage, they had not only a new printer for us, but a lot of mail. They didn't get their suitcase, or their luggage when they arrived, and it took a couple of weeks just before they left when their luggage arrived, and in that luggage everything was available except our printer and our mail.
Oh.
So, that's how it worked. Later on, of course, we started to use sail mail and WinLink system quite extensively, and that helped a lot. Our reports to keep in contact with our family and friends, and we wrote a lot of reports, and Almuth did the illustration. We used to send them by ordinary mail or by fax, and later by sail mail to people in Switzerland, one person perhaps in Germany, and they would make the distribution. Well, what suggestion we can give you is we don't know, because today one has completely other means of communication. We know that we are dinosaurs. We do not have television. We do not have cell phones or iPhones and things like that, because we don't need them. We do have, since South Africa, Inmarsat phone for emergency communication, but we have not used it once except for one test. And if you want it, you can have it.
Okay. Thank goodness that you never did have to use it for that emergency.
Can you imagine how much time we get like that?
Yes, I know. That's so great. People I'm sure there's so many people that just can't imagine that. And you avoid a lot of that, what they call electromagnetic radiation also. So, yeah, good. And I can remember you must have been, when you were waiting for the mail there, you must have been waiting for a whole packet of SSCA bulletins. I remember we used to do that. We'd, get them before they were available online. You'd wait, and when you got the whole pile of them, then we'd go through all the bulletins one after the other. So that's good. I like that story.
Just one little incident, which is probably also interesting. One pile got lost, and I didn't know about it, of course. How could I know that a package of mail was just lost? But when we got to Singapore, we had the possibility to do internet. And
after a long time,
all Indonesia. And then my bank account was deep red. Automatic payments had been made, and they were continued to be made, and I got more and more into the red. Why? Because in that package, which was sent a long time before, was a form which had to be filled out and stamped by the police or some other official authority to confirm that I was still alive, so that they would get my pension. And I did not return that form because I never received it. And so I did not receive my pension anymore.
Oh, gosh. We often hear people asking about piracy and thievery involving sailors around the world. And these are kind of scary stories that people are interested in and always ask, what do you do about this? So, what story do you have to tell us?
Well, thievery luckily did not hit us. We nearly never locked our boat because we thought if somebody tries to get in, he would damage the entrance, and then we had to do a lot of work. And by the way, we also have a rather modest boat, we think so. And just in Curacao, in one of the anchorages, another boat was robbed, and the couple on it was beaten. But to us, nothing happened.
You want to know about piracy? Well, we knew about piracy quite well, and when we were on the way from the Andaman Islands direction Ado Atoll, we were passing about 50-60 miles south of Sri Lanka, Ceylon. And when approaching the southern tip of Sri Lanka, I was on watch. It was second half of the night, and I could always see a light appearing. Here and there, it just appeared, disappeared, and I did not like the general idea of that. I switched off my navigation lights and kept a very sharp lookout. And then morning hours came, and with the first light, I could see a boat approaching at high speed from about 45 degrees on our starboard bow, and we had the Jenny boomed out to starboard, so we were rather immobile. The boat swung around parallel to us. In the meantime, I had woken up Almuth, asked her to bring our pepper spray, long distance in the right pocket for both of us, short distance left pocket, and we waited, and that chap was very close on our starboard side, reduced speed, same speed as us, and we didn't know what was going to happen. Then suddenly one of the guys went to the foredeck, opened the hatch, disappeared for a while, came up and showed 2 large fish. And then we knew, hell, they want to sell fish. And then we started to discuss back and forth, and they asked, do you have beer? I said, no, we don't have beer, but we see what we can do. And I threw a line, a very long line, to the other boat, so that we could operate back and forth. And first they sent us not 1 fish as we asked for, but 2. And then Almuth.
And then I was so happy that they were not pirates, they were just fishermen. I gave them our last beer. I put them into a bag. We didn't have a lot. We didn't have many. And I added some biscuits and some small money, some coins, and we sent it over to them. So they were quite happy at the moment, and then they disappeared. They drove away again.
It was our last beer, and we knew that we would not get any beer in Ado Atoll. We knew that there's absolutely nothing to get in Chagos, and we would have to wait for maybe nearly 3 months total, and then the trip to Madagascar. So we had no beer anymore. I was not quite happy at the moment. And, he had disappeared, and suddenly he came again, now from the port side, approaching us, turning again, parallel to us, and he threw over a bag. In that bag was what was in the bag?
In the bag were a kind of crackers instead of bread, what they had as proviant, and some biscuits.
So sweets.
Sweets, sweets, a lot of sweets, tamarind sweets, now I got it, and the address of the captain. So that means as soon as we were somewhere ashore in Madagascar, as we reached Madagascar, we wrote to this captain and sent him some photos and a drawing which I have done of his boat. And he was very happy, and we stayed in contact for many, many years, and he hoped that we come back to Sri Lanka.
To visit him.
Yeah, but we never did. It's such a long way.
Well, so it was an anticlimax in a way, but a happy anticlimax. But then, when we were on the way from Madagascar to Mayotte, which belongs to the Comoros, we knew that we were in pirate-invested areas, so we tried to be close to the land during daytime and make the passage at night. And that seemed to work nicely. But we got a message from Federal Criminal Police, something like that. We sent out positions, APRS, every 24 hours, using Almuth's call sign, which is, of course, a German call sign. And they picked that up, and they advised us that we are in operating in pirate-infected areas, and they gave us telephone numbers, fax numbers, and everything what we could not use.
Thank goodness that those threatening-looking boats actually turned out to be fishermen wanting to sell some fish or give you some fish, and okay, Eddie, I don't think that one last beer would have lasted you more than 3 months. Anyway, so you didn't have to blame Almuth for giving away the last one, and saying that now we have no beer until Madagascar. All right.
Well, it turned out to be like that. We had some beer when we were in Chagos, when that British vessel came. It's a coastal Czech vessel. It's not Coast Guard. It's for those for that area. They make checks, and they checked our boat as well, and they invited us for a dinner on board, and we had beer there as well. Cool beer.
Yeah, that's good. You were lucky to be going through Chagos in the good era. Now they don't like people to go there at all. So, and it's quite a process to get permits. All right. That was good stories. How did you sustain yourself financially, especially, Eddie, when you weren't getting your pension anymore?
I got it, of course, later on, but perhaps Almuth can say a few words.
Yes, we both are receiving our pension, so we manage to live with that. That's not a problem. We are living quite well with it. I would like to say, well, one helps each other. If we meet in a bay another sailor and he has a problem, we are going over and helping and trying to solve the problems. And the other way, we ask for help. Does he have a tool, the other sailor, which we don't have? But mainly we have nearly all tools. But it is a good comradeship from sailor to sailor.
Yes, that is a very good point. That lots of times we trade services, and we exchange one person doing something for the other, and we make it all up by having a beer or giving a dinner or something like that, and so that helps out financially just as well.
Yeah, that's it. Fully agree.
Okay. Now, looking back with hindsight, would you do anything differently?
I wouldn't change anything. I would just do it the same again, because all turned out so very well.
Oh, there's nothing to add from my side. Of course, it would look different these days, because it's many, many years later. We started in 98, and now it is 2020. So, from that point of view, certain things would change, but we can't say what at the moment.
What were some of the big highlights of your voyage?
A very big highlight for me was when we sailed to Fiji, we visited Vanua Levu, cleared in Zabu Zabu, and everywhere we were greeted by strangers, by people living there, bula bula, bula bula. So we were very, very welcomed. Then we continued sailing, visited some bays, and in Nassau Bay, that was a bay east of Vanua Levu, and many corals to the side, so we had to manage and drive through the corals, and a tiny little boat came us and welcoming us, spreading the arms and said, "Welcome to Nassau Bay." That he invited us to come ashore. He showed us his plantation. He showed us how he made copra, and we made walks with him, and we really made very good friends. After a while we said, now we have to leave, and as we were so good friends, I asked him for his address because I wanted to send him some photos, some memories. He gave us his address, the address of his daughter, Abigail. She lived and worked in Suva. So once we have returned to New Zealand, we sent her photos of Bob and the bay, and then she wrote back via email and wrote back, "Your Fiji daughter." So suddenly we had a Fiji daughter. I couldn't imagine having a daughter. I have no children, and now I had a Fiji daughter. So the next season we had to sail to Suva just to meet her. And that was a very, very nice reunion. And on board, she said, "I am your daughter. I am preparing. I'm cooking for you. I'm doing the dishwashing. I'm doing everything." That was so lovely to have a Fiji daughter. And we stayed in contact many, many years.
When we got to Raroia, that's in Tuamotus, the eastern part, we anchored off the small village. At that time, no electricity, no airstrip, nothing at all. They just relied on a supply ship which would come from time to time. And somehow or other we got in contact with a family, and it was absolutely great. They showed us how they prepare the mussels for the black pearls, and how they do that whole business, and it was amazing. And then the grandmother had her birthday, and we were invited. Of course, it started to get dark, and we were sitting there. There was just some little Coca-Cola bottles with a wick in it, and some oil, and that was all the light we had. And they were singing, and we were eating, and we had a wonderful time. And then I talked to an elderly gentleman.
That was her husband.
That was her husband, a little bit younger than myself. And I asked him if he could remember Kon-Tiki. And then he said, "Yes, I took part in the film." I said, no, not that. If he could remember the real Kon-Tiki. He said, yes. He was a boy then. One morning, they found tins, or you in America call them cans, and they were not rusty. So they knew that something had happened up to windward, because they were not rusty, and they, with their dinghies without outboard, they sailed across that bay until they reached that Motu, small island, which is now called Kon-Tiki Motu, and they found the crew, and they were able to bring these people back to the village, and they also took back as much from the Kon-Tiki as they could. These Kon-Tiki parts were taken back to Norway and redone, and you can see that Kon-Tiki today in the Nautical Museum, Maritime Museum in Oslo. But that's not the point. I asked that chap if he knows the way, if he could show me the way across the bay. He says, oh, I've been living here all my way. I know all these coral heads. So I said, okay, can we do that together? He said, yes, but he would like to take his grandson along with him. He said, okay, no problem. So we left, and it was pouring, and one couldn't see a thing. And he just sat in the bows and showed a little bit left, a little bit right. And when we passed, we could see those damn coral heads. It was frightening. The rain passed away, and suddenly we were on the other side. We anchored, we cooked something, ate together, slept on board, and next morning we had a look at that island, which is really absolutely nothing. Well, he showed us a few more things, and then on the way back he asked if he could drive the boat back. I said, well, on the motor, of course. I said, of course, go ahead. And so he did it, and finally we anchored. And we said, now we have to leave. They said, no, you can't leave. And then we said, we have to. Yeah, but we haven't made a farewell for you. They prepared a farewell. We were eating much better than when the grandmother had her birthday. Yes. And before leaving, they presented Almuth with 3 wonderful black pearls. Absolutely wonderful black pearls.
Wow, how nice.
And for me, they gave me 1 pearl, a very large one, as a present. It was, we couldn't give them anything. What could we give them? We had the children on board, and it was just touching. Later on, when we were in the Society Islands, we met a daughter, and we knew that would happen, who flew there, no, not flew, had taken, one could fly, took the supply boat and was there to sell the pearls. And there we bought for practically nothing, I think 2 more pearls, just to have about 5. And when I was in Switzerland, I had something made for Almuth, and I was told that one of these pearls would cost about 800 Swiss francs of her. And so it was absolutely amazing. And, well, that's it. That's one of the highlights. There's of course there's many highlights over the years, but that's
that's something that sticks with you. Wow, being given black pearls. That's very nice. Okay. Well, one thing I know is that you still have a single malt. So, are you continuing cruising, or what are your plans next?
Well, that was end of 2012, and we didn't sail around the world to be able to check off on our checklist, done that. For us, it was quite clear. We continue. So, 2013, we started early, past the Dardanelles, Marmara Sea, Bosporus, to enter the Black Sea beginning of May. It's not advisable to go in there earlier. And we stayed 1 full season in the Black Sea, which is, of course, quite rather interesting. Then we returned to Kusadasi. The following year, we crossed back up and down the Med. Then, of course, Gibraltar, went to Madeira, visited the Desertas and Salvajes, and ended up in the Canaries. The following year, that's 2015, we went over to Morocco, back to the Canaries, sailed down to Gambia, and spent a couple of months in Gambia, sailing up the river as well. So we spent Christmas and New Year in Gambia. That is from November to January. Then from Gambia we sailed over to the Cape Verdes, where we stayed 3 months, not to arrive in the Azores too early. And up to the Azores, 3 months in the Azores, and then to Portugal, where we wintered. The following year, Guadiana, Morocco, Canaries, and since then, that is 2018, we have been sailing in the Canaries, Morocco, Canaries, and so on. And I don't think we will continue much further considering our ages.
Can you tell us your torpedo story?
That goes back a long time. I think that was 89. We had visited the Soviet Union, probably the first boat on its own.
That was you with your wife.
Yes.
I was not in on the boat in that time.
No. And a daughter and so on. And we that was an amazing thing to go there and then leave that country again. And then we crossed over to Hong Kong to be able to clear in. The general idea being that on the same day we wanted to continue to the Åland Islands. And in those days it was very difficult to get to the Åland Islands, and one had no charts of the Åland Islands, but I had contact with a Finnish Sea Bear Club, and they gave me some information. Of course, it was written in Finnish, but the drawings one can understand. And so that was the general idea. We got to Hong Kong early morning, about 3 o'clock, can't quite remember the time. Tried to anchor, but the anchor would not hold, which is quite obvious because there's no sand or mud, it's just polished granite. And finally, my anchor hold. I said, okay, we get up at 7, and then we go ashore. I do the clearing in, and you do the shopping, etc., etc. And we got up again, 7 o'clock, practically no sleep, and we couldn't get the anchor up. And it just would not come. I could not imagine how that was possible, because it can't get stuck on polished rock. So I asked my wife to drive into anchor cable, and when the bow dips, I would take in some slacks. I did that about 3 times, and then suddenly we were surrounded by air bubbles coming up, air bubbles from the water, and it smelled from fuel, and I thought I had caught a pipeline. I went to the charter and had a look around, but there was that fuel station which we wanted to use the following day, but no pipeline. When I came up, no air bubbles anymore, and the fumes started to disintegrate. Nothing. So I tried again, and I said, we have a heavy load, probably an old tree, waterlogged timber or something like that. And when I had the thing up about 30 centimeters below the waterline, you couldn't see any deeper because the water is rather muddy. I saw that I had caught a torpedo. It was hooked into the rear part of the torpedo. You could see the 2 propellers. You could see the steering equipment, elevator and rudder, and I said, okay, let's pull it up as high as possible, just the after part, because I wanted to have it as high up as possible. I didn't know how long it was, but I was expecting that there was a fuse on the other end. And, I called the Coast Guard, and it took them some time. I called again, and then they arrived with a very modern Coast Guard vessel. It was absolutely great, with water guns and hydraulic crane and so on. And one of the officers came on board. I showed him the problem. He says, well, everybody has to leave the boat. I said, well, you can take my crew, but I'm going to stay here. And then I asked him, what are you going to do? He said, well, we call the Navy. Okay, you call the Navy. Then they stood by about half a mile away from us, and we waited. I sat on the foredeck with a book, a whistle, and
a wee drum.
A wee drum. That is a single malt. And I was sitting there, and when sometimes a small boat would come by, I just tried to slow them down because I didn't like waves. And otherwise the port was closed. That was one of the remarks the officer made. And after a long time, the Navy came with a small boat, about 3 officers. They came on board. One of them had a small plastic bag and some lanyards. I asked him what he was going to use that for. It's for the duds. I said, which duds? I showed them the problem, and then they saw, well, it's a torpedo. So they said, we can't do that. We need an expert. Well, that expert, where does he come from? They said, well, he will be from the Newland Brigade. Newland Brigade, I had knowledge. That was close to Helsinki. That's quite a long way away, and it was Saturday and holiday time. Very difficult to get people. So I said, okay, I have to wait. Of course, our plan had been ruined totally. So my people were ashore. And in the meantime, a lot of people were ashore as well. The fire brigade had appeared, the police has appeared. It was fantastic, of course, the whole business which was going on. And then after a while, that so-called expert came along, and it was very funny. He came and had a look, and then he also saw me, of course, and he said, well, I have seen you before. I said, well, where are you? He said, well, Newland Brigade. I said, yes, but where are you stationed at the moment? He said, in Niinisalo. Well, that's where they were training the United Nations people, observers, etc. And I just had been there a short while before together with my ambassador to have a look at that whole thing, and so he knew me. When we got on along fine, and then he said, well, what are we going to do? I said, look here, that's no problem. You talk to that Coast Guard boat. They don't speak English. You just talk to them, and they do exactly what I want to do. They shall approach very slowly, lower the hook of their hydraulic crane. Then we hook up that torpedo, and then they can lift it up a little bit. I can unshackle my cable, and then off. And that's what they did. They went away, and after that, I was allowed to use the fuel station as long as I wanted. Well, when I got there, of course, television, radio, reporters, and they all wanted to have their news, etc., because it was just before 12 o'clock, and the Finnish used to be great newspaper readers, and they had to have all that. And so I had to talk, even so my boat was not really made fast. That's it. It appeared, of course, in many newspapers, and many friends over there knew exactly who it was, who was on the really first pages of all the newspapers there. And then it took some time until I talked to the people again from the Navy or Defense Department. I can't remember, it's not so important. If they had a look at the torpedo, they said, yes, you have broken the torpedo. You have just removed the rear part, the driving part, and the divers knew exactly where you had anchored, and they went to look for it, and they found the front part, and it's a torpedo. I can't remember. I've noted it down somewhere in T-53 or I can't remember. In any case, it had a diameter of 53 centimeters. I don't know how long it was, but it was loaded with 450 kilos of explosives. And
oh my gosh!
When they destroyed the whole thing, it exploded beautifully. Well, that's the.
Okay, what a story! You hook a torpedo, and no one knows what to do about it. So hemming and hawing. Well, let's call the higher authorities, and finally you just say, well, just hook it with the thing and pull it up. All right, that's a very funny story, and it appeared in a lot of different magazines. And so I thought, since you were such a celebrity, that people on this Circumnavigation Summit would enjoy that story. Edi and Almuth, what else would you like to share with our audience?
Well, I think we owe you an explanation why we stayed in the area of New Zealand for such a long time. The marina we stayed at is very close to the airport of Tauranga, and it doesn't disturb you at all because the noise is not so bad. But what we noticed is that mainly on Wednesdays, Saturdays and Sundays there were gliders in the air. So one day we decided to go to the airport, that is to the airstrip then on the side, and talk to these people. And there was a gliding club, the Tauranga Gliding Club, and we asked, would it be possible to learn gliding? And they said, well, we suggest just take a few flights to see if you like it or not. And we did that, and we thought it was a good idea. And we started to get instruction flights. And then you have those different small exams, A and B, which is nothing. And we took all the necessary information with us to study during our sailing in the islands. And when we got back to New Zealand, we asked to do the theoretical exam immediately. We did it, passed well, and then we still had to do the aeronautical voice license, the full aeronautical voice license. We were operating in controlled airspace. We did that, and finally we became qualified glider pilots, and from then on we really started to learn gliding. We did a lot of gliding. We were just nearly crazy. When leaving Australia, we had to decide, shall we go to South Africa to continue gliding, or shall we stay in the Far East a little bit more, Indonesia, etc. And we thought, well, we've had a good time, many years, and about 8.5 years, something like that, but a good time, but we are cruisers, so that is one part of the history. We don't glide anymore, but we have absolute great memories. What do you say, Almuth?
Yes, that's it. It was a wonderful time, and we could share our experiences. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? Why happens this? And what could I have done better? That we had very, very good communications and discussions.
So, Almuth, how would you describe the sensation of gliding? What is it like?
I would never have thought I could become a glider pilot. So when Edi finally asked me, would you like to learn gliding, I thought, what shall I do up there in the air? I have no idea. But if I say no, I would never know if I would be a pilot. So I said yes, and I started. It took me quite a while until I got solo, because I felt so comfortable with the instructor behind me. But once I got solo the first time, then I got the virus. I wanted to fly again. I wanted to learn more, and I could not stop. That was just wonderful.
you were still fascinated with the wind, like you are with the boat, and then you were gliding. So
Yes,
that's a
true.
wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, Helmut and Almuth, thank you so much for this interview. The last thing is, do you have any parting words of wisdom for us?
Well, I was a beginner, so I had to learn everything, and I can only say, don't try to make it better, just do what the captain says, that comes out best. That's all what I can say.
All right.
Well, you already know that we are dinosaurs, but nevertheless we have sailed many years without having any incident, so the system doesn't seem too bad. What I'm trying to get at is one should, and I'm trying to convince all these long-distance cruises or go away, one should not forget terrestrial navigation. Terrestrial navigation, I'm not talking about classroom work. Every child can draw a line on a chart, but it takes a lot of practice taking a good bearing from an unstable platform. Number two, it takes a lot of experience of picking up land points on an unknown coast, and be sure that one has that and compare it with other bearings so that one can check the position. And why I'm saying that, when sailing around Europe or the States, you have charts, electronic charts, which are absolutely correct. But there are areas where it is not like that. We had problems, for instance, in all these, no, we didn't have problems, but we would be extremely careful in areas where there is no shipping. On the eastern part of Vanuatu, for instance, or in the Lau group, or in many other places. In New Caledonia, we had, for the faraway places, we had charts which were made par l'ordre de l'empereur, also by order of the French emperor. So that was ordered 1848, and there were two systems of coordinates on there, Greenwich and also Paris, and we had to deal with that. Those people made good jobs. Later on, we used a lot of charts from 1880 on, 90. A lot of charts were made at the beginning of last century, corrected during the First World War, but they were all using sextants and chronometers, and these chronometers could only be synchronized later on when they had radio communication. So there are errors, and we have seen, I do not call them mistakes, I call them errors of more than 1.5 miles. And an area which is quite dangerous when one goes to Madagascar, for instance, Diego Suarez in the northeastern part, you have absolute accurate systems because there's shipping there. As soon as you leave that area and go turn north, you don't have any accuracy anymore. And, especially when you get to the northwestern part of that island, it's all out, and there are so many reefs. And I have read reports of people being surprised that they lost their boats because they were navigating, so-called navigating, so accurately. So please practice taking bearings and transfer them on a chart. And perhaps another thing, we rely on wind steering. We have a small boat, we don't have a generator. Of course, we produce some electricity with a wind generator underway with our drop shaft generator. We have also a wind generator, and that is sufficient for us. But I'm never so happy with the autopilot, not only because it's electric, but it uses a lot of power. On the other hand, the wind steering, once it's set properly, we feel that the boat is behaving like in a vice. Of course, it doesn't go straight according to the compass. It goes straight according to the wind, and that is good enough for us. We don't worry about that. Those few additional miles which you make on an ocean passage don't matter at all. So all wind pilot, a decent wind pilot, we have one with a servo spade rather, which transmits the power onto a dedicated steering rudder, which is quite aft. Disadvantages, of course, it is there, and you have difficulties sometimes when you want to make fast in a modern marina stern tool, or while maneuvering, that thing wants to go straight all the time, but one can deal with that. The better part is wind steering.
We think the wind steering is the best comrade. It doesn't need electricity, it doesn't eat, it doesn't sleep, it always works.
Doesn't drink.
It doesn't drink.
Yeah, it doesn't drink beer. Okay, yes, that's your most valuable crew member. We thank you so much for this wonderful interview. And again, the great story that you had about the torpedo and some wonderful words of wisdom about things. Thank you so much for sharing your circumnavigation with us, and good sailing, good winds to you, and keep plenty of water under your keel, and keep plenty of beer in your refrigerator. All right. Thank you so much, Edi and Almuth.
Thank you very much as well.
Thank you for having patience to listen to us.
If you enjoyed this interview, make sure to listen to our other guests in the series, subscribe to SSCA YouTube channel, access the MP3 audio recording on SSCA website. Get the scoop on the latest SSCA activities and benefits, read the latest cruiser bulletin, participate in the forum and Facebook group, and please promote our organization to who you think might benefit.